Ambassador Varek's 4 eyes tracked a drop of foul water as it hit the floor of the command bunker. Drip, drip, drip. In the terrifying silence, every small sound felt like a gunshot. Varek, a small alien with skin like smooth, wet stone, was shaking. The command bunker, once a bright center of the mining colony Cygnus VII, was now a damp, dark tomb. Only emergency lights, red and weak, flickered overhead, casting long, nervous shadows. Outside, the silence was occasionally broken by a low, distant rumble. The Krell Raiders were methodical. They didn't rush. They took their time destroying everything. Varek leaned close to the main comm screen. The glass was cracked like a spiderweb, and the display showed only a field of swirling static. They had been trying to reach the Galactic Alliance fleet for 3 cycles. Each time the result was the same, static then despair. He took a deep breath of the stale, recycled air. He had to try one last time. For the last 400 remaining colonists huddled deep below the surface, he had to try. He keyed the emergency distress code. The system connected, sounding a harsh electronic tone. Fleet Command, Varek spoke, his voice dry and fragile. This is Cygnus VII. We are under full-scale attack by Krell forces. Our defenses have fallen. We request immediate extraction. We are out of time. Varek waited, his small claws gripping the console. The silence that followed was heavy, thicker than the deepest space. He prayed for the sound of a cruiser captain, for the promise of a nearby task force. Instead, a cold, automated voice echoed back, flat and without emotion. Querying asset availability. A long pause. Varek shut his eyes. This was the moment. The voice returned, colder than before. No available military assets within 20,000 light-years. All vessels are engaged in priority zones. Assistance cannot be rendered. The words were simple, yet they delivered a death sentence. No one was coming. The Galactic Alliance, which Varek had served for decades, had left them to die. They were completely alone. The distant rumble suddenly became louder. The ground beneath the bunker floor shuddered. Varek looked up, his 4 eyes wide with fear. The scraping sound started then, a horrible metallic screeching that meant the Krell had breached the final outer defense layers and were now moving on the bunker itself. Varek stood up, picking up a plasma pistol that felt too heavy for his hand. He looked at the 2 terrified security guards remaining in the room. They knew their job now was not to win, but to buy a few more seconds for the civilians below. The air pressure in the room dropped sharply. A bright, searing light appeared on the far wall as Krell plasma weapons began melting the hardened steel door. The metal hissed, groaned, and began to warp inwards. Varek raised his useless pistol as the door buckled. This was the end. The heavy steel door groaned its last. Molten metal dripped onto the floor as the Krell plasma blast tore a huge hole through the center. Ambassador Varek closed his 4 eyes, bracing for the inevitable. The 2 security guards fired their small pistols in a final, pointless show of resistance. Through the smoke and the ruined door stepped the first Krell Raider. It was a massive insect-like creature, covered in sharp, dark armor. It raised a massive claw ready to strike. And then the sound hit. It was not the sound of an explosion. It was not the shriek of an Alliance fighter. It was a sound of raw, painful force. It was a sound that seemed to ignore the air, the walls, and the distance. It was a deep, resonating howl that vibrated in Varek's chest cavity and shook the foundations of the entire colony. It was loud enough to make Varek drop his pistol and clap his hands over his sensitive hearing organs. It was a sound of immense power arriving too fast, too violently. The Krell Raider that had just stepped through the door froze. Its large, segmented eyes flicked upward toward the ceiling, then toward the ruined opening. The sound was clearly painful even to the Krell. The alien didn't roar in anger. It made a sudden, sharp clicking noise, a sound of confusion and deep alarm. All fighting outside the bunker stopped. The only sound was the lingering echo of that terrifying, powerful howl. Varek looked at one of his guards, a tall, scaly creature named Jax. Jax shook his head, speechless. What kind of ship made a noise like that? The Krell Raider at the door quickly pulled back, retreating through the hole it had just made. It was moving too fast for a simple tactical withdrawal. It was running from something. Varek scrambled back to the cracked comms console. The static was suddenly gone. Instead, a strong, clear signal, one Varek did not recognize, was broadcasting over the colony's emergency channel. The signal read, Designation, Talon Origin, Terran Status, Engaged. Varek felt his breath catch. Terran. That meant human. Everyone in the Alliance knew about the humans, the newcomers, the aggressive, reckless ones who fought too hard and laughed too loud. They were not members of the Alliance command structure. They were unaffiliated, sometimes mercenaries, always trouble. A voice then cut through the confusion. It was deep, calm, and slightly rough, speaking the standardized galactic trade language, but with a strange, heavy accent. "This is the human starship Talon," the voice stated clearly. "We picked up a low-power distress ping. Looks like you're having a bad day. State your status, Cygnus VII. We are establishing defensive lines. We've got a job to do." Varric looked back at the hole in the door. The Krell had not been scared by an Alliance fleet. They had been terrified by the howling arrival of a single human warship. Ambassador Varric stared at the comm screen. "Terran. Humans." He quickly ordered his remaining guards to activate the external bunker viewport. The thick, reinforced lens focused on the sky above the colony's main landing field. A massive shadow fell over the wrecked buildings. The human ship, the Talon, was ugly. It was not built with the elegant curves of Alliance cruisers. It was a blocky, angular vessel, covered in thick, dark armor and bristling with weapons that looked less like tools and more like threats. It looked like a giant, heavily armed brick dropped from the sky. But the Krell were not laughing. They were scattering. The Talon did not stay high in orbit. It plunged straight into the lower atmosphere, ignoring all standard safety protocols. It flew so low that Varric could see the heat shimmering off its engines. Suddenly the ship's weapons fired. They didn't use graceful laser beams. They launched thick, powerful rounds that punched through the air, hitting the main Krell landing zone with terrifying force. The impact wasn't clean, it was explosive and messy. Whole groups of Krell armored vehicles simply vanished. "They are too fast," Jax the guard whispered. "They are fighting too close to the ground." The humans were using their ship not just as a gun platform, but as a giant, moving weapon. A group of Krell fighters rose up to engage the Talon. Instead of dodging, the Talon changed direction sharply, using its raw mass and powerful engines to simply smash through two of the smaller fighters. The explosion was brutal. Then the ground action began. A ramp dropped from the Talon's belly. Out stepped a small squad of human soldiers. They were encased in heavy, practical armor that made them look unnaturally large. They didn't march in neat lines. They ran straight toward the nearest concentration of Krell. The Krell forces, used to their enemies hiding and retreating, were completely unprepared. The humans' weapons were loud and fired fast. The humans seemed to move with a strange mix of planned strategy and sheer reckless rage. They did not slow down when they were hit, they just kept moving forward. Varric heard the human commander's voice roar again over the comms. "Ambassador, we've cleared your main entrance. We are setting up a small defensive perimeter. We can only evacuate 50 personnel at a time. Get your people moving now. We've got 30 minutes, then we leave." Rourke's voice was calm, almost casual, as if he wasn't battling an army of fearsome raiders. Varric realized the key difference. The Alliance valued safety and rules. The humans valued getting the job done no matter the cost or the speed needed. They weren't military professionals. They were brutally effective saviors, howling from the void and changing the fate of Cygnus VII with pure, aggressive will. The next 30 minutes were a blur of noise and desperate motion. The human soldiers were machines of efficiency. They did not stop to rest or celebrate. Their only goal was the quick rescue. Ambassador Varric gathered the remaining colonists, mostly miners and support staff, and guided them up the makeshift ramp into the belly of the Talon. The ship's inside was rough, smelling of engine oil and burnt metal, but it felt safer than the Alliance's cleanest cruisers. Varric saw Commander Rourke near the boarding ramp. The human commander was tall, heavily muscled, and sweat was dripping from his face even in the cold armor. He had a deep cut on his helmet, but he was still smiling, a fierce, sharp expression that was both friendly and dangerous. Rourke quickly looked over the last group of colonists. "That's the last of them, Ambassador," he said, his voice cheerful but urgent. "Time to go. We've kept the Krell busy long enough." Varric looked at the commander. "You came for us. When the Alliance refused. Why?" Rourke shrugged, reloading a large weapon. "Distress call is a distress call. We were in the neighborhood, relatively speaking. We saw trouble, we fixed it. That's just what people do, right?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Now get inside. We are pulling out." As Varric climbed the ramp, he saw the ship's hull up close. It was not perfect. There were scorch marks and deep dents. The humans were not gods who flew invincible ships. They were fierce, determined beings who pushed their limits and took risks that no other species would dare. The ramp hissed shut. The Talon's engines roared, and the whole ship lifted quickly off the ground. Varric looked out a small reinforced window as they punched through the atmosphere. Below, the Krell were already retreating, their confidence crushed by the swift, brutal intervention. Then the ship jumped to warp speed. The powerful energy shift created a deep, resonating sound, that familiar, terrible howl that had announced their arrival and now marked their swift departure. Varric leaned back, safe for the first time in days. He watched the streaking lights of faster-than-light travel. The Galactic Alliance had ignored the cry of a dying colony because it wasn't strategically important. The humans, a species many considered barbaric, had risked everything on a simple moral duty. The ambassador realized that day that fear could have many sounds: the click of a Krell claw, the cold static of a failed Alliance transmission. But from now on, for the people of Cygnus VII, the sound of salvation would always be the terrifying, magnificent howling from the void that only humanity could make.